Everyone in the restaurant froze when a furious businessman marched up to Keanu Reeves and dumped a glass of ice water in his lap. No fight, no anger, just a quiet look in Keanu's eyes that left the room unsettled. Moments later, he walked out without a word. No one knew the truth behind that humiliation or what it would set in motion. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The afternoon sun hung low over Los Angeles, casting gentle streaks of gold across the quiet neighborhood where Harbor House Grill sat tucked between a bookstore and an old guitar shop. The restaurant had been a staple for decades, owned by the same family whose entire identity revolved around kindness, good meals, and a sense of belonging. Most customers came here to escape the chaos of the city. On this slow weekday, the place smelled of fresh sourdough rolls and rosemary chicken, and the hum of quiet conversations drifted peacefully through the air. Keanu Reeves stepped through the front door with a soft, almost tired smile. He wore simple clothes, a dark jacket, jeans, and sneakers blending in as much as a man of his reputation possibly could. His hair, slightly grayer now at the temples, brushed gently against his shoulders. He had spent the morning visiting children in the oncology ward at a nearby hospital, listening to their stories, giving them encouragement, offering whatever brightness he could. The emotional weight of those visits always settled quietly on him afterward. He wasn't here for attention. He wasn't here to be recognized. He only wanted a warm meal and a quiet moment to gather his thoughts. The hostess, a college student named Lily, looked up from her stand and blinked twice before realizing who was standing in front of her. Her eyes widened with a mix of surprise and disbelief. She composed herself quickly because she had promised the owner she would treat celebrities the same as everyone else. But her voice carried a hint of nervous excitement when she greeted him, welcoming him as though he were any other patron walking in from the afternoon sun. Keanu gave her an appreciative nod and asked for a small table in the corner, somewhere quiet. She led him to a cozy booth near the window, gently placed a menu on the table, and told him the server would be right over. Keanu sat back, exhaling slowly. The wooden table felt warm beneath his hands, polished by decades of customers who came in seeking the same peace he was seeking now. He picked up the glass of cold water waiting at his seat, took a sip, and let the calm of the room settle into him. People glanced his way occasionally, whispering in hushed tones, but no one approached him. They seemed to understand instinctively that he was here not as a movie star, but as a man needing rest. He had barely opened the menu when the front door swung open with force. A gust of warm air rushed into the restaurant, breaking the stillness. A group of sharply dressed individuals entered, the kind whose laughter filled space before they even spoke. At the front of the group walked a man in a tailored navy suit, his steps confident and heavy, his expression carved from something colder than ambition. His name was Derek Malone, early 50s with slicked back hair and the demeanor of someone used to being obeyed. Derek glanced around the restaurant with impatience, as though the place offended him by existing. Then his gaze landed on Keanu. Something inside him snapped into focus, something dark, old, and simmering. His lips curled into a thin smile, not of recognition in the warm sense, but recognition sharpened by bitterness. Lily approached Derek to ask how many were in his party, but he brushed past her without so much as a nod. His eyes remained locked on Keanu. The people behind him fell silent, confused by the sudden shift in his mood. Derek walked straight toward the corner booth, his steps growing louder with each stride, his expression tightening into something unmistakably hostile. Keanu looked up calmly, unaware of the storm about to break open around him. Derek stopped at the edge of Keanu's table, looming over him with a presence that forced nearby customers to turn and look. The easy warmth in the restaurant shifted into something tense and uncertain. Conversations faded. Forks hovered mid-air. Even the soft music playing through the overhead speakers seemed to lower in volume, as if the room itself sensed trouble. Keanu placed the menu down gently and offered a polite smile, the kind he gave to strangers who sometimes approached him with questions or excitement. But Derek's expression showed neither admiration nor curiosity. His glare carried years of resentment, sharpened by a bitterness Keanu had no way of understanding yet. "So this is how it goes, isn't it?" Derek said, his voice loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "You show up anywhere you want. Everyone treats you like some kind of saint, but you leave destruction behind you and walk away like it's nothing." The words landed hard against the quiet air. Keanu's brows lifted slightly in confusion. He kept his tone soft and steady when he asked if they had met before. Derek laughed, not out of humor but disbelief. He stepped closer, leaning one hand on the table as if claiming the space between them. "You don't remember me. Of course you don't. You never had to deal with the fallout." "My father's studio was everything to him. Everything. Until your decisions ruined it. Until you walked away from a project that would have kept us afloat." Keanu blinked, processing the accusation carefully. He had worked with independent producers early in his career, and those years blurred together in flashes of scripts, auditions, and commitments he had no power to control. But he had never intentionally harmed anyone. His heart tightened as he searched his memory. The restaurant manager, a kind man named Arturo, hurried over with visible concern. He whispered to Derek that this wasn't the right time or place, but Derek ignored him completely. His voice rose again, sharp enough to cut the air. "You destroyed my father's life. Do you understand that? Your silence, your choices, you bankrupted him. We lost everything. And you just kept rising. Everyone adored you while we were left picking up pieces." Keanu felt the attention of the entire room pressing down on him. He didn't respond right away. He didn't defend himself. He didn't argue. His first instinct was empathy, not anger. He opened his mouth to speak, but Derek didn't give him the chance. "You know what the worst part is?" Derek said, leaning even closer. "He defended you. Even when he was drinking himself to sleep every night, he defended you, said you weren't to blame. But you were. And someone should finally say it." Keanu swallowed the words, settling inside him like heavy stones. He kept his voice soft when he apologized for any pain his past decisions might have caused. He told Derek he never intended harm, never wanted anyone to suffer because of choices tied to his work. But Derek wasn't listening. His jaw clenched, his hands trembling with a mixture of rage and decades-old grief. The room held its breath, waiting to see what he would do next. Arturo stepped forward again, asking Derek firmly but respectfully to return to his table. Derek stepped back, but only slightly, as if deciding how far he wanted to take this confrontation. His eyes never left Keanu's. Keanu sat still, calm as ever, not realizing the moment of humiliation was only seconds away. Derek's breathing grew heavier, as though he were standing at the edge of a decision he had been waiting years to make. Without warning, he reached for the glass of cold water sitting on Keanu's table. Arturo shouted for him to stop, but Derek had already lifted it high. The water splashed down Keanu's shirt and into his lap, icy and shocking against the warmth of the room. Gasps erupted everywhere. Someone dropped a fork. Someone else muttered a stunned whisper. Keanu froze for a moment, not out of fear, but from the sheer disbelief of what had just happened. Water dripped onto the floor, forming a small, shimmering puddle beneath him. "That Derek," said his voice trembling with triumph and heartbreak, "is what my family got from you. Nothing but cold consequences." Arturo stepped between them at once, calling for security and demanding Derek leave. But Keanu stood before they could escalate the situation. He placed a steady hand on Arturo's arm and shook his head gently. "It's all right," Keanu said. "There's no need for more trouble." He pulled a few bills from his pocket, left them on the table, uneaten meal or not, and walked toward the door in quiet dignity as the entire restaurant watched, stunned into silence. The drive back to the Hollywood Hills felt longer than usual, even though the streets were mostly clear. Keanu kept both hands steady on the wheel, the quiet hum of the engine filling the space around him. The late afternoon sun cast streaks of orange and pink across the sky, the kind of sunset that usually softened his thoughts after a long day. But not today. The air inside the car felt heavy, still carrying the shock of what had happened inside Harbor House Grill. Every time he blinked, the image returned, Derek's hand lifting the glass, the cold water hitting his lap. The stunned silence of strangers who didn't know what to make of a moment so cruel and so sudden. Keanu wasn't angry. Anger rarely found a place inside him. What he felt instead was something deeper, a quiet ache in his chest that made him shift uncomfortably in his seat. Words from earlier replayed over and over until they felt engraved behind his ribs. "You destroyed my father's life. You bankrupted him. He defended you even when everything fell apart." Keanu pulled into his driveway and let the engine idle for a few seconds. His home was peaceful, surrounded by tall trees that shielded him from the city's noise. Normally, stepping inside was enough to lift any weight from his shoulders, but today, the silence that awaited him seemed to echo with questions he had never asked himself. He turned off the car, but didn't get out right away. Memories surfaced, soft and fragmented, of a man with hopeful eyes and a gentle voice. Martin Malone had been one of the early believers in Keanu's career. He had offered help when Keanu was still finding his place in the industry. Independent producers like Martin were the backbone of small creative communities, and Keanu had admired him for caring more about passion than profit. But something had happened between then and now. Something Keanu hadn't understood. Something Derek had carried as a wound for decades. Did my success cost him everything? The thought tightened his throat. There were so many moments in those early years when decisions weren't entirely his own. Contracts came with hidden clauses. Studios pushed him toward certain roles while pulling him from others. He was young, overwhelmed, grateful for any chance to work. He assumed the adults in the room were making fair choices. He assumed no one was getting hurt. But what if he had been wrong? Keanu finally pushed open the car door and stepped into the cool air. As he walked toward the front door, he felt a subtle tremor in his chest, not from fear, but from responsibility. It was a feeling he had known often when facing loss grief or injustice. It had shaped him for decades. It defined the way he moved through the world. Now it returned, urging him toward something he wasn't yet sure he was ready to face. Inside the house was dim and still. Keanu set his keys on the small wooden table near the entrance and stood there for a long moment. He could have tried to shake off the experience. He could have written it off as a stranger's misplaced anger. People blamed him for strange things sometimes. Fame made him a target for projection. But this felt different. Derek's pain wasn't random. It came from somewhere real. Keanu reached for his phone. Only one person could help him sort through emotions this tangled. He found Maya's contact and pressed call. Maya answered on the third ring, her voice warm but alert, the way it always was when she sensed something was wrong. Keanu rarely called in the middle of the day unless it was important. She had managed his schedule for over 20 years, but more than that, she had become one of the few people he allowed into his inner circle. She knew his quiet moments, his thoughtful silences, and the heaviness that sometimes crept into him when he felt he had let someone down. "Are you home?" she asked before he had the chance to speak. "Yeah," Keanu replied softly. He walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, elbows resting on his knees. "I didn't make it to the meeting this afternoon. You don't sound like yourself." "What happened?" Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, searching for the right place to start. There was an incident at Harbor House Grill. A pause followed long enough for him to imagine her sitting up straighter. "What kind of incident?" He took a slow breath. "A man confronted me. He said my decisions destroyed his father's life. Then he threw a glass of water on me." Maya exhaled sharply, frustration and protectiveness threading through her voice. "What is wrong with people? Keanu, are you all right?" "I'm okay," he said. It was just water. It wasn't the act itself. It was what he said. He leaned back, looking toward the bookshelf where old scripts and memories of his early films rested. He said I ruined his father's studio, that I walked away from a project that could have saved them. Who was this man? "His name is Derek Malone." The silence on the line stretched again, this time heavier. Maya knew the film industry well enough to recognize names quickly, but this one didn't ring any bells for her. "I don't know him," she said. "Is he in the business?" Tech, Keanu answered. But his father was a small, independent producer. I remember him vaguely. Kind eyes, a small office with stacks of handwritten notes everywhere. He believed in me before I had anything to offer. I didn't think about him in years, but today? Keanu's voice drifted. Today, it felt like the past just walked up and demanded an explanation. Maya sighed, trying to steady the moment with reason. Keanu people in pain look for someone to blame. Derek sounds like he's been carrying bitterness for a long time. That doesn't make his behavior acceptable, but it also doesn't mean he's telling the whole truth. There were so many decisions others made on your behalf back then. You didn't control everything. I know, Keanu said, though the words felt incomplete. But I also don't want to dismiss him. He looked like someone who'd been living with a wound that never closed. Doesn't mean you caused it, Maya insisted gently. Maybe not intentionally, Keanu said. But what if something I didn't understand back then actually hurt his father? What if he's right in ways I didn't realize? Maya sighed again, softer this time. Keanu, listen. You are kind. You're thoughtful. You consider consequences more than anyone I've ever met. But this man ambushed you in public. He humiliated you. His approach wasn't honest. It was emotional revenge. Keanu stared at the floor. Maybe. But feelings don't come from nowhere. So what now, she asked. I need to know the truth, Keanu said quietly. I can't just pretend this didn't happen. Keanu stood and walked toward the window, watching the city stretch below him in the fading sunlight. He felt Maya's silence on the other end of the call, the kind that meant she was weighing his words carefully. She knew this version of him well, the one who refused to leave questions buried, especially when those questions involved someone else's pain. I keep thinking about his father, Keanu said, about the way he used to talk about storytelling, about how much hope he carried. If something happened that I didn't understand back then, I need to face it now. Maya spoke softly, accepting the direction she always knew he would choose. All right, if you want answers, we'll look for them. I'll start digging into old contacts, anything connected to Martin Malone. But, Keanu, whatever we find, you need to remember you didn't set out to hurt anyone. I know, he whispered, but intention doesn't erase impact. He ended the call and let the room fall into silence again. The weight in his chest hadn't lifted, but now it pointed him somewhere. He couldn't undo the past, but he could refuse to run from it, and that he knew was the only path forward. The next morning arrived quietly, the kind of morning that carried a thin blue haze over the hills and made the world feel softer than it truly was. Keanu had barely slept. The confrontation with Derek replayed in a loop that refused to loosen its grip on him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the hurt in Derek's face more clearly than the anger. That expression told a story far deeper than the moment of humiliation alone. By sunrise, Keanu had already made up his mind. If the truth was buried somewhere in his past, then he needed to uncover it himself. He walked downstairs to the small room he rarely opened, a narrow storage space tucked beside the basement stairs. It held pieces of a life that felt distant. Now old film reels, boxes labeled with fading marker props from early projects, and binders filled with contracts and letters he had kept for reasons he couldn't explain. Perhaps some part of him had always known that the past would call him back someday. He turned on the single bulb hanging overhead. Dust floated through the beam of light, settling over forgotten memories. Keanu crouched beside a stack of boxes, running his fingers across the cardboard until one label caught his eye. Early work, 1990-1994. The years when everything began. The years when he met people like Martin Malone. He lifted the box onto a small table and opened it carefully. Inside lay a mix of highlighted scripts, contracts stapled together at odd angles, handwritten notes from casting directors, and letters from producers who once believed deeply in the promise of a young actor. He slowly sifted through the stack, letting each page pull him back through time. A thin folder near the bottom drew his attention. Its edges were worn as if it had been handled more times than the others. Inside, he found an early script from the abandoned project Martin had hoped to produce. He remembered that script like a faint melody. It had heart ambition and the rawness of a filmmaker who believed a story could change someone's life. Attached to it was a typed note signed by Martin himself, thanking Keanu for taking the time to read it and expressing how much it would mean to him if Keanu could be part of the film. Beneath the note, Keanu found a photograph he hadn't realized he still owned. It showed the two of them standing in front of Martin's tiny production office. Keanu looked young, uncertain, hopeful. Martin looked proud in a quiet way, the kind of pride that came from believing in someone before the world did. His smile was warm and earnest, the smile of a man who poured everything into his work. Keanu sat down staring at the photograph longer than he intended. He felt something shift inside him, something old and unresolved. He remembered Martin as a man who gave everything he had to storytelling, a man who believed in people more than he believed in profit. But Keanu had no memory of how their collaboration ended, only that the studio had pulled him in a different direction. He was told it was a scheduling issue. He was told it was temporary. He was told decisions were being made for him, not by him. Now, decades later, he wondered what the real story had been. He set the photograph aside and looked deeper into the box, searching for anything that could explain the missing years, the silence that followed the collapse Derek blamed him for. But the folder contained nothing more, just fragments of what might have become something meaningful. Keanu closed the box slowly, feeling a heaviness settle into him again. There was only one person left who might know the truth. He retrieved his phone from his pocket and scrolled until he found the name he had not called in years: Sam Whitaker. Keanu hesitated with his thumb hovering over the call button. Sam Whitaker was one of the few people who had seen every side of his early years, from rushed auditions to sleepless script readings to the pressure of navigating an unpredictable industry. Sam had once told him that success could feel like a lightning strike, bright enough to blind anyone standing too close. Keanu wondered now if he had been blinded back then, unaware of the shadows his opportunities might have cast on others. He pressed the call button before doubt could change his mind. The line rang twice before Sam's voice came through, deeper and slower than Keanu remembered, but still carrying its familiar warmth. Keanu, that you? Yeah, Sam, it's me. Well, I'll be. Haven't heard your voice in ages. What can I do for you, kid? Keanu smiled faintly at the nickname. Sam had called him kid even when he was 29 and filming some of his first major roles. Hearing it now felt like stepping into a memory he hadn't visited in years. But the smile faded as quickly as it came. I need to talk to you about something from the past, Keanu said. Something important. Sam paused, the line growing quiet, except for a faint crackle of static. Sounds heavy. You all right? I will be. I just need some clarity. Keanu took a breath. Do you remember a producer named Martin Malone? Another pause, this one longer. When Sam finally answered, his voice carried a note of sad recognition. Yeah, I remember Martin. I found out something yesterday, something about his studio closing. Someone told me I played a part in it, and I need to know what really happened. Sam sighed heavily, the kind of sigh that carried years of stories inside it. Kid, that's not a conversation for the phone. Why don't you come by the house? I've got coffee and I've got time. You still in the hills? Yeah, Keanu said. I can be there in an hour. Good. Come on then. We'll sort this out. When the call ended, Keanu remained still for a moment. Sam's reaction confirmed that whatever had happened was not just a misunderstanding or an exaggeration born of anger. There was history here. History he had never fully understood. The storage room felt colder now, shadows stretching across the boxes, as if reminding him that the past had weight, and weight had consequences. He placed the box back where it belonged, though the photograph of him and Martin lingered in his mind long after he turned off the light. He walked upstairs, grabbed his jacket, and headed to the garage. The morning air carried a crispness that sharpened his focus. He wanted answers, not because Derek had demanded them, but because something in his heart refused to look away. As he backed out of the driveway, he replayed what little he remembered of the project. Martin had been enthusiastic, pouring himself into every detail. He had talked about creating a story that honored ordinary people, the kind of film that didn't rely on spectacle but on truth. Keanu had admired him. He had wanted to help, but the momentum of his rising career had pushed him into decisions he never questioned. Younger him assumed the industry worked like a river. You just followed the flow. But sometimes rivers swept people away. Keanu tightened his grip on the wheel. Whatever answers Sam had, he was ready to hear them. The drive to Sam Whitaker's home wound through quiet neighborhoods lined with tall eucalyptus trees, their leaves shifting gently in the late morning breeze. Keanu's thoughts stayed fixed on the photograph he had held earlier, the way Martin's smile radiated pride and hope. The weight of not knowing the truth pressed heavier with each passing mile. As he pulled into Sam's driveway, he saw the retired producer sitting on the front porch, a mug of coffee in hand. Sam looked older than Keanu remembered, his hair fully silver now, but his eyes still sharp and steady. He stood slowly, giving Keanu a small nod that carried more understanding than words ever could. Keanu stepped out of the car, feeling the tension in his chest ease only slightly at the familiar sight of a man he trusted. Sam didn't ask how he was or why he looked so troubled. He simply gestured toward the chairs beside him. "Come sit," Sam said. "We've got some things to talk about." Keanu lowered himself into the chair, the quiet settling between them, like a blanket preparing to uncover long-buried truths. For the first time since the confrontation with Derek, Keanu felt ready to face whatever came next. The morning light settled gently across Sam Whitaker's porch, warming the wooden boards beneath their feet. A faint breeze rustled through the trees lining the yard, filling the silence, while Sam gathered his thoughts. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his hand steady despite the weight he carried in his expression. Keanu waited quietly, knowing Sam would speak when he was ready. Years in the industry had taught him that some truths required space before they could be voiced. Sam set the mug down on the small table beside him and clasped his hands together. "I figured this day might come," he said softly. "Didn't know when, but I knew it would." His tone wasn't accusatory, just honest in a way that felt heavier than any reprimand. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "I saw his son yesterday, Derek. He said I ruined his father's life, that I caused the studio to fail." "I don't remember everything clearly, Sam. I don't know what's true and what isn't." Sam let out a long breath, the kind that carried years of unspoken regret. Martin Malone was one of the good ones. "You remember that, don't you?" "I do," Keanu said. "He believed in me before I believed in myself." "That's right," Sam continued. "He believed in a lot of young talent. He poured everything he had into their work, not because he wanted fame or money, but because he loved storytelling. That was who he was. Pure heart, pure passion." Keanu felt a dull ache rising in his chest. Then what happened? Sam looked out over the yard for a moment, searching for the least painful way to tell the truth, but there wasn't one. "You remember that script he sent you? The one with the handwritten notes all over it? The story about the firefighter who lost everything and rebuilt his life?" Keanu nodded. He had found the script in his storage room the night before. "I remember. Well, Sam said back then your career was taking off faster than anyone expected. Studios were competing for you. They wanted you tied to big projects with big returns. Martin's film was small-budget, independent, and risky, the kind of story studios never fully understood." Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. "I didn't turn it down. I remember wanting to do it, but everything felt like it was happening so fast." "You didn't turn it down," Sam repeated. "That's the truth. But the studio backing your other film forced you to walk away from Martin's project. They wanted you exclusively. They didn't want you associated with a small independent studio when they were investing millions. They made it sound like they were protecting your career. They made it sound like scheduling problems. But it wasn't that simple." Keanu felt the ground shift under him. "They made the decision for me." "They made it, and they made it sound like you agreed," Sam said. "Martin got the call from the studio, not from you. They told him you weren't interested anymore. They didn't want to risk losing you to a smaller project. They didn't care what it meant for him." A sharp pain pressed behind Keanu's ribs. "He must have thought I betrayed him." Sam shook his head firmly. "That's what you need to understand. He didn't blame you. Not once. He told everyone around him that the system chewed people up. He said you were just starting out and you trusted the people you were supposed to trust. But the truth. The hit to his studio was too much. Losing you meant losing the funding he needed. Within 2 years, he had to sell everything. Keanu sat back, breath-catching, as the weight of it finally settled. 2 years. A life's work undone in 2 years, partly because of decisions he didn't even know were being made in his name. Keanu looked down at his hands, letting the truth settle through him like cold water. He had always known the film industry could be harsh, but he hadn't understood just how far its decisions could reach, or how deeply those decisions could cut someone's life apart. Now he could picture Martin sitting in that small, cramped office, clutching the phone as he heard the news. A man with hope in his voice, suddenly realizing the foundation beneath him had shifted. A dream collapsing quietly without warning, without fairness. Sam watched him carefully. He kept going for a while, he said. Tried to find new investors, tried to pitch smaller projects, but he was already stretched thin. Losing the lead actor he built the screenplay around meant losing the final bit of leverage he had. And the timing was brutal. Studios were tightening budgets. Independent work was dying out. He couldn't recover. Keanu felt the heaviness in his chest deepen. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't someone say something? You were young, Sam replied gently, and the people around you wanted to keep your image clean. They didn't want you worrying about things you couldn't control. They wanted you focused on the next big role. Besides, Martin didn't want pity. He never asked anyone to intervene. He believed in handling his own battles. But he lost everything. Keanu said the words barely above a whisper. Sam nodded. He did. His marriage fell apart. His finances sank. He stopped going to industry events, and eventually he closed the studio. We all thought he'd bounce back, thought he just needed time. He was a strong guy, but some blows hit harder than others. Keanu swallowed tightly. And Derek, he blamed me for all of it. Derek needed someone to hold accountable, Sam said. He was a teenager when everything fell apart. He watched his father break under the weight of losing his dream. People in pain look for a face to attach to their grief, and you were the most visible one in the story, even if you weren't the cause. Keanu leaned back the porch chair, creaking softly beneath him. He stared at the distant line of trees, trying to piece together the innocence of his past actions with the consequences they had apparently created. The boy he had been back then didn't understand leverage or studio strategy. He didn't understand the ripple effect of being someone a corporation saw as valuable. He only knew he wanted to act and trusted the path others laid out for him. Sam continued, voice steady but solemn. Martin told me once that he didn't resent you. He said you were put in an impossible position. He blamed the studio system, not you. But love from a father doesn't erase the hurt his family felt watching him fall apart. A tightness pulled at Keanu's throat. And now, Martin is gone. Sam nodded. He passed about 8 years ago. Heart issues. He wasn't old, but he carried a lot of stress. Derek took over caring for his mother. He built a career in tech, worked hard, made a name for himself, but he never let go of what happened. That anger became his fuel. Keanu closed his eyes. There was no escaping the truth now. Even if he wasn't at fault, he had been part of a chain of events that affected a man's entire life. Intentions didn't erase reality. Sam placed a hand on Keanu's shoulder. You need to hear this too. You didn't abandon Martin. The industry did. But I know you, kid. You're the type who carries things even when they aren't yours to carry. Keanu swallowed again. Maybe. But that doesn't change what happened to him. Keanu sat in silence for a long moment, letting Sam's words sink into the deepest part of him. The porch felt still, as if the world had paused to give him space to absorb the truth. He finally lifted his gaze, the heaviness in his eyes no longer confusion, but resolve. I should have checked on him, Keanu said quietly. Even if I didn't know everything, I should have tried to understand why things changed so suddenly. I walked forward, and he was left behind. Sam shook his head gently. You were a young actor in a system built to control you. None of us knew how hard the hit was going to be. Not even Martin understood how fragile his footing had become. Maybe so, Keanu replied, but I can't ignore what happened. Not now that I know. He looked out toward the trees again, a new fire building behind his calm expression. If my success played any part in his downfall, even unintentionally, then I owe it to him to make something right, not to ease my guilt, but because he believed in me. Sam studied him for a moment, then nodded. Then do what you need to do, kid. And Keanu knew he would. The drive back from Sam's house felt different from the one that had brought Keanu there earlier. The same winding roads and tall trees surrounded him, but now they seemed to press closer, as though urging him to face the truth he had just learned. The sunlight shimmered on the windshield, but it did nothing to soften the heaviness settling over his heart. He gripped the steering wheel with quiet determination, replaying Sam's words again and again until they formed a single, unavoidable truth. Martin Malone's dream had collapsed, and Keanu's rising career had been used as the lever that helped break it. He parked in his driveway and sat for a moment before stepping out. The house was silent when he entered, the kind of silence that reflected his thoughts back at him. He walked into the living room and paused near the bookshelf where he kept old scripts and memoirs from friends in the industry. He ran his fingers along the spines, feeling the weight of every decision he had made, without knowing who else those decisions touched. He didn't have answers yet, but he had direction, and direction, even a painful one, was better than silence. Keanu reached for his phone and dialed Maya. She answered on the first ring this time, worry tightening her voice. Did you learn anything? I did, Keanu said, lowering himself onto the couch. More than I expected. What happened? He took a quiet breath before speaking. Martin didn't blame me, but the studio's decision to pull me from his project destroyed the funding he had lined up. He tried to recover, but he couldn't. Within 2 years, he lost everything. Maya cursed under her breath, something she rarely did. So Derek wasn't lying. No, Keanu said softly. His anger comes from somewhere real. There was a long silence on the line. Maya was experienced enough to know the emotional weight Keanu carried whenever he discovered someone had suffered because of the ruthless machinery of the entertainment world. She also knew he was the kind of person who refused to walk away from that knowledge. Keanu, she said, carefully, what are you thinking about doing? I need to make this right. Another pause. I knew you were going to say that. But before you do anything, you need to understand the risks. Keanu leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I'm listening. Derek Malone isn't just some angry man from your past, Maya said. He runs one of the most aggressive tech investment companies on the West Coast. His reputation alone scares half the startups in Los Angeles. He's loud, influential, and vengeful. If he finds out you're digging into his family history, he could turn this into a public spectacle. And you know how quickly public narratives twist things. Keanu didn't respond right away. He let her words settle, acknowledging the reality, but refusing to let it guide his moral compass. Maya continued, You've spent decades building a reputation for humility and kindness. People trust you. But all it takes is one angry CEO with a microphone to make your intentions look manipulative. This could become a PR disaster overnight. He closed his eyes briefly. This isn't about PR. I know that, she said, her voice softening. But the world won't. Keanu sat up straighter, his voice steady when he finally replied. This is about a man's life, Maya. A man who believed in me. A man who lost everything. Maya didn't answer right away. Keanu could almost picture her on the other end of the line, pressing her fingers to her forehead, the way she did whenever she wrestled with a decision she could not fully support, but knew she could not stop. She had stood beside him through more challenges than most managers faced in a lifetime. Yet she also understood that once Keanu felt morally responsible for something, he never walked away from it. Keanu, she said slowly, I understand your heart, better than most people ever will. But intent won't protect you here. Derek Malone has money influence and a long memory. He could spin this into a headline that questions your motives. Actor digs into grieving family for personal redemption. Or worse. Keanu remained quiet, listening but unmoved. The warning wasn't wrong, but It didn't outweigh the weight he now carried. Maya kept talking, her voice firm but pleading. It's not that I don't want you to help. It's that I've seen people tear you down for far less. You've always kept your integrity because you avoid needless conflict. If the press finds out you're involved with the Malones again, especially after what happened in that restaurant, they will sensationalize it. The last thing you need is a smear campaign. Keanu leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. I'm not looking for attention. I'm looking for the truth. And the truth might hurt you, Maya countered. People don't care about nuance. They hear one dramatic sentence and they stop listening. He let her speak because he valued her caution, but caution alone had never been enough to quiet his conscience. Finally, he said softly, Derek's father deserved better. He believed in me, Maya. He gave me opportunities when I was still trying to find my footing. If my career played any part in the hardship that followed, I can't ignore that. You didn't sabotage him, Maya said gently. The system did. Maybe, Keanu replied, but I was part of that system. Even if I didn't understand what was happening, my name still played a role. I don't want Derek's version of the story to be the only one that exists. I want to know what Martin went through. I want to know what happened to the people he left behind. Maya sighed again, this time with resignation rather than frustration. I had a feeling you'd say that. You know me, Keanu said. Yes, she admitted. I know exactly who you are, and that's why I'm scared you're going to get hurt trying to fix something that wasn't yours to fix. He paused, then spoke with quiet certainty. Doing nothing would hurt more. There was a shift in her tone, a small surrender layered with reluctant admiration. All right, if you're set on this path, I'm not going to fight you. But I will ask you one thing. What is it? Promise me you won't confront Derek again. Not until you have all the information. He's too volatile. I won't, Keanu said. This isn't about him. It's about understanding what Martin went through. Maya breathed out slowly. Then tell me what you need. Keanu looked at the box, still sitting on the table from earlier, the photograph resting on top. I need to know what happened to Martin's wife and daughter. I need to know where they are now. Maya was silent for a moment before replying. I'll start looking, and I'll be discreet. Thank you, Keanu said softly. After the call ended, the house fell quiet again. Keanu set his phone on the table and exhaled slowly. The weight he'd been carrying since the restaurant confrontation had shifted, not lighter, but clearer. Now it had direction. He walked to the kitchen sink, filled a glass of water, and stood there for a moment, staring out the window at the fading daylight. Los Angeles was beginning to glow, that familiar mixture of beauty and noise, but today it felt distant. He touched the edge of the photograph on the table. Martin's face seemed to hold both hope and exhaustion, things Keanu hadn't understood back then. He had been young, barely grasping his place in the world, much less the impact of his choices on others. But ignorance didn't erase consequence, and silence didn't heal wounds. If anything, it deepened them. As the sky darkened, Keanu felt a small ache in his chest. Not guilt alone, but a sense of responsibility that came from knowing someone had believed in him long before the industry did. Someone who had paid a price he never deserved. He whispered to himself, I'm sorry, Martin. I should have looked back sooner. But apologies were only a beginning. He returned to the table, gathered the documents, and placed them back in the box. Tomorrow, Maya would start searching. Tomorrow, the path forward would become clearer. For tonight, all he could do was prepare himself for whatever truths waited in the shadows of the past. Keanu closed the box gently and rested his hand on the lid as if acknowledging a promise. Whatever happened next, he would face it, and he would not walk away again. The next morning, the sky over Los Angeles hung in a pale, gentle haze. Keanu woke early, unable to sleep through the restless thoughts that had settled into his mind after speaking with Maya. By 7, he was dressed quiet and ready for whatever came next. His phone rang right as he stepped into the kitchen. Maya's voice carried a mix of efficiency and hesitation. I found her, she said. Emily Malone. She works as a school counselor in Pasadena. I reached out. She wants to meet you. Keanu felt something shift inside his chest. Nerves, gratitude, a sense of responsibility stronger than before. When she can meet today, late morning. She chose a small coffee shop near the school. I think she's nervous, but she didn't sound angry. That's more kindness than I deserve, Keanu murmured. You always think the worst of yourself, Maya replied gently. Just go. Listen. Be honest. The rest will unfold. He thanked her, grabbed his keys, and headed out. The drive to Pasadena felt quiet and reflective. Rows of modest homes, early joggers, children walking to school, ordinary life unfolding around him, grounding him in a way he needed more than he realized. The coffee shop Emily chose was tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. Small tables lined the windows, and warm light spilled across polished wooden floors. Keanu stepped inside and immediately spotted her. Emily Malone sat near the back, hands wrapped around a mug. She was in her early 40s with dark hair, loosely tied back, and soft tiredness in her eyes, the kind that suggested years of carrying burdens with quiet resilience. When she looked up and saw him, she stood too quickly, almost knocking her chair over. Hi, Mr. Reeves, she said, her voice trembling with surprise. I never thought you'd actually come. Keanu offered a gentle smile. Thank you for meeting me, Emily. She gestured for him to sit. Please, I didn't know what to expect, but you being here means a lot. They both sat, and for a moment neither spoke. Emily took a slow breath before beginning. Maya said you wanted to talk about my father. Keanu nodded. Yes, I learned some things recently, things I didn't know back then. I needed to hear the truth from someone who lived it. Emily looked down at her cup for a long moment, hands tightening around it. My dad loved the work, loved movies, loved stories. When he got the chance to work with you, he felt like everything was finally falling into place. Her voice softened, drifting somewhere far away. He used to come home talking about how talented you were, how polite you were, how you treated everyone with respect. He thought you were going to change the industry. Keanu's throat tightened. He believed in me before anyone had reason to. Yes, Emily said quietly. He did. There was another pause, heavier this time. Emily finally met his eyes. When the project fell apart, he tried to hold on. He kept saying there had to be a mistake, that the studio would call, that someone would fix it. Her fingers trembled slightly around the cup, but no one did. Keanu felt the words land inside him sharp and unforgiving. I'm so sorry, Emily. I didn't know. I should have asked more questions. She shook her head gently. My father never blamed you. He blinked, startled. He didn't... No, she said. He blamed the system, the money, the people who made decisions without thinking about the people who had to live with them. Her eyes glistened. But my brother... He held on to anger, and over time it twisted into something that wasn't fair to anyone. Keanu lowered his gaze, absorbing every syllable. Emily let out a slow breath as though she'd been holding it for years. After the project fell apart, things changed very fast at home. Dad tried to start new ones, but doors closed one after another. Investors pulled out. Studios stopped calling. It was like one setback erased his entire reputation. Keanu listened without blinking, every muscle in his chest tightening. The coffee shop hummed softly around them, but her words cut through everything else. He spiraled. Emily continued. Not all at once. It was gradual. First, he stopped talking about work. Then he stopped going out. Then, she hesitated, searching for the right words. Then he started believing he had failed us. Keanu leaned forward slightly. He didn't fail anyone. Emily smiled sadly. I told him that 100 times. My mother told him that 1,000 times. But when someone's dream is taken away, the mind doesn't always follow logic. She folded her hands on the table, steady but fragile. My brother Derek was furious. Not at Dad, not at the studio either. He needed a face to blame, and since Dad believed so deeply in you, Derek decided you were the reason everything collapsed. Keanu felt the ache deepen. I never imagined this kind of pain lived behind what he said. I thought he was exaggerating. I thought maybe he misremembered. No, Emily said gently. The hurt was real. But the story, it became distorted over time. Derek built his own version and he clung to it. It gave him something to fight against. Keanu rubbed the back of his neck. And did you ever feel the same anger? Emily shook her head firmly. I never blamed you. My father never blamed you. After everything happened, he still watched every movie you made. Every single one. Her eyes softened. He said your heart was good, that success hadn't changed you, that you deserved every opportunity you got. The words struck with quiet force. Keanu blinked, swallowing hard. He had lived many years trying to be the man people believed he was, but hearing that someone he had unintentionally hurt still saw goodness in him, it unsettled him in the most tender way. Emily continued, he would sit in the living room with the lights off and watch your films late at night. My mother used to say it was his way of staying connected to the dream that slipped away. He wasn't bitter toward you. Never. Keanu's voice trembled slightly. I wish I had known. I wish I could have spoken to him. Explained. Thanked him. I think he knew, Emily said softly. There was silence again, but this time it felt like shared understanding rather than hesitation. Keanu took a deep breath. Emily, I'm not here to reopen wounds. I'm here because I need to honor your father. Not with words alone. I want to do something meaningful. She looked at him surprised. What do you mean I don't know the exact shape yet? Keanu admitted. But he supported me when I was nobody. He believed in something the world couldn't see yet. I can't undo what happened, but I can acknowledge it. I can help carry forward the dream he didn't get to finish. Emily's expression softened into something warm, fragile, and grateful. You don't owe us anything, Keanu. He shook his head gently. That doesn't mean I don't feel responsible, or that I don't want to help. She looked down at her hands, touched by his sincerity. So, how exactly can I help you? Keanu met her eyes with quiet resolution, by telling me who your father was, not the producer, not the victim of a bad decision. I want to know the man behind the dream, and I want to honor him in a way he would have been proud of. Emily nodded slowly, emotion rising behind her composure. Then I'll tell you everything. Emily shifted in her seat, her voice softening as she gathered her thoughts. My father wasn't defined by what happened to him, she said gently. He was defined by how much he cared, about his work, about people, about stories that meant something. She paused, looking past Keanu, as though seeing a memory only she could access. He believed movies could heal people. He believed that if a story was honest enough, it could change a life. Keanu listened with steady attention, absorbing every detail. The image of Martin Malone was becoming clearer, no longer just a name attached to regret, but a man with passion, conviction, and a heart that had once beaten brightly for the art he loved. Emily leaned forward. If you want to honor him, then honor the part of him that never gave up on people. Even when his dream fell apart, he still believed in goodness. He still believed in you. The words landed deep enough to make Keanu's breath catch. Thank you, he whispered, for trusting me with this. Emily offered a small, hopeful smile. Then let's figure out how to do this together. In that moment, a partnership began, one rooted in truth, compassion, and a shared desire for healing. 2 days after meeting Emily, Keanu drove to a quiet, assisted living facility just outside Glendale. The building stood behind a row of jacaranda trees whose lavender blossoms carpeted the sidewalk. Morning sunlight streamed through their branches, casting soft shadows on the pavement as Keanu stepped out of his car. He paused for a moment, gathering himself. This visit carried a different weight. Emily's stories had opened the door to her family's past, but meeting Linda Malone felt like walking directly into the heart of it. Inside the facility was peaceful, filled with the gentle sounds of piano music and the soft murmur of staff helping residents begin their day. A nurse guided him to a small common room, lined with bookshelves and framed pictures. In the corner, near a sunlit window, sat an older woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She wore a pale blue sweater and held a book in her lap. Even from a distance, something about her posture suggested strength that time had not erased. Mrs. Linda Malone, Keanu asked softly as he approached. The woman looked up and her eyes widened. Recognition flashed instantly across her face. Not confusion, not surprise. Something warmer, something that felt like seeing an old photograph come to life. "My goodness," she breathed. "Keanu Reeves." He offered a gentle smile and nodded. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." She gestured to the chair beside hers. "Sit, dear. Emily told me you might come. I wasn't sure you would, but I hoped." Keanu lowered himself into the chair, feeling the gravity of the moment settle between them. Linda studied him with careful tenderness, as though searching for something she had once known to be true. "You look tired," she said quietly. "But kind, just like my husband always described." The words tugged at something deep inside Keanu. "I'm here because I needed to understand the past, and because I owe your family more than I realized." Linda nodded slowly, her gaze drifting toward the window. "Emily told you what happened to Martin." "Yes," Keanu replied, "but hearing it from someone who lived it, that matters too." She closed her book gently and set it aside. "Martin loved his work, loved it with a passion that sometimes scared me. When he lost that project, part of him cracked. Not because of money alone, but because he believed he had finally found a story that matched his heart. Losing it felt like losing his purpose." Keanu listened, every word settling into the spaces he had avoided for years. Linda continued, her voice small but steady. "My husband died believing he wasn't good enough, that he had failed his children, failed me." She paused, touching the corners of her eyes as though steadying herself. "But he never once blamed you. Not for a single moment." Keanu lowered his head. "I wish he had told me that." "You were young," she said, "and the industry wasn't built to protect kindness. Too many decisions happen behind closed doors. Too many people are left to pick up pieces they didn't break." He looked at her, deeply moved. "Mrs. Malone, I am so sorry for all of it, for the silence, for not knowing sooner." She reached across the small table and placed her hand lightly over his. Her touch was warm, fragile, and filled with something that felt like forgiveness. "Keanu, dear, I don't need an apology. What I need is for someone to remember Martin, not the way he died, but the way he lived." The room felt still as Linda's hand rested lightly over Keanu's. Outside the window, a breeze stirred the jacaranda blossoms, sending a few petals drifting past the glass. Keanu lifted his gaze, meeting her eyes with quiet sincerity. "I want to remember him," he said. "I want the world to remember him. But I don't know how yet." Linda's expression softened. "The fact that you came here at all tells me you'll find a way. You always carried more heart than people gave you credit for." He blinked, taken aback by the tender familiarity in her voice. "Did Martin ever talk about me?" She let out a gentle breath, as if the question unlocked a deep well of memories. "Oh, constantly, even after everything fell apart. He used to say you had a rare soul, that you cared about the people behind the camera just as much as the ones in front of it. He admired that. He saw pieces of himself in you." Keanu felt something in his chest loosen, then tighten again. "I don't feel like I deserve that kindness." Linda shook her head. "Deserve has nothing to do with it. People see what they see. And Martin saw goodness, even when life hardened around him." Silence settled again, but this time it was warm and reflective rather than heavy. Linda eased back into her chair, her voice growing quieter as she continued. "You know, the night before he passed, he watched one of your movies. He thought I was asleep, but I wasn't. He said he wished he had been brave enough to reach out, to tell you the truth, to tell you that what happened wasn't your fault. He wanted to protect you from carrying a burden that wasn't yours." The words pierced through Keanu more deeply than he expected. He swallowed hard, his voice barely steady. "I wish I could have told him he wasn't alone." Linda nodded gently. He wasn't. He just didn't know how to let the world in anymore. They sat together in the quiet of the common room, the weight of shared grief uniting them. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Malone, I made a promise to Emily. I told her I would do something meaningful in Martin's name, something that honors the part of him that believed in stories and people and second chances. Linda regarded him for a long moment before responding. What would you want that to look like? I'm not sure yet, Keanu admitted, but I know it needs to come from the heart, something that brings life to what he stood for. Linda reached to her side and picked up a small wooden box that sat near her chair. She placed it gently on the table between them. The lid was worn, the corners softened by years of handling. Then this might help you understand where to begin. Keanu looked at the box, but didn't touch it yet. What is it? It's what he left behind, Linda said. Not his regrets, but his hopes. He opened the lid slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile air around them. Inside lay several items, a stack of old photographs, a small notebook filled with handwritten ideas, and a sealed envelope with his name written across the front in ink that had faded with time. Keanu froze. My name, he whispered. Linda nodded. He wrote that letter but never found the courage to send it. I think he always hoped the right moment would come. Keanu stared at the envelope, feeling the weight of the decades contained within it. A lifetime of unspoken thoughts, a message meant for the man he used to be and the man he had become. Are you sure you want me to have this? He asked softly. Linda smiled, her eyes glistening. It's yours. It always was. Keanu held the envelope gently as though it might crumble if he gripped it too tightly. The faded ink, the careful handwriting, the quiet intimacy of seeing his own name written by a man he had unknowingly hurt. It all pressed into him at once. His breath trembled as he looked up at Linda. Thank you, he whispered. This means more than I can put into words. Linda's smile was tender, touched by years of sorrow and grace. Martin wanted you to keep going, to keep believing in the good you carry. He never wanted his pain to become your shadow. Keanu lowered his gaze, absorbing the truth embedded in her words. I promise you, he said quietly, your husband won't be forgotten. I'm going to do something real, something that honors who he was. I believe you, Linda replied. You have the same gentleness he saw. As Keanu closed the wooden box and held it carefully in his arms, he felt a shift inside him, a sense of clarity, a responsibility rooted not in guilt, but in love and respect for a man who had once seen something hopeful in him. He stood to leave, and Linda reached out, touching his hand one last time. Go do something beautiful, she said, and Keanu knew he would. Keanu drove home from the assisted living facility in complete silence. The wooden box sat on the passenger seat beside him, its weight far greater than the wood it was made from. Every red light, every curve of the road reminded him of Linda's gentle eyes and the quiet strength in her voice when she placed the box in his hands. The faded envelope inside it lingered in his thoughts like a heartbeat he couldn't ignore. By the time he reached his house, the sun was dipping behind the hills, leaving streaks of gold across the sky. He unlocked the front door, slowly stepped inside, and carried the box to the living room. Setting it on the table, he sat before it for a long moment, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together as if in silent prayer. The house was still. No sound except his own breath. It felt right that the world quieted around him for this. Finally, he opened the lid. He lifted the envelope carefully. His name, written in Martin Malone's handwriting, looked fragile, almost shy, as though the words had waited patiently for decades to be read. Keanu traced a finger along the edge before he broke the seal. The paper inside was yellowed, the handwriting slightly uneven. He unfolded it slowly, letting the page rest gently in his hands. He began to read. Keanu, I don't know if you will ever see this, or if I will ever find the courage to send it, but I need to write these words for my own heart as much as for yours. Keanu's breath caught. Already the tenderness in the opening lines made something inside him tremble. I want you to know that I never blamed you for what happened, not even for a moment. You were young, and the world was just beginning to open for you. I saw that spark. I saw the humility and the gentleness behind your eyes. I knew you were meant for something far bigger than the small film we were working on. Keanu lowered the letter slightly, his vision blurring before he could steady it. He blinked, then continued reading. The decision to pull you from my project was made by people who cared more about profit than people. I don't hold anger toward them either. Life has its storms. Some we can prepare for, some we cannot. Keanu felt a tear slip down his cheek, then another. But I want you to carry one truth with you. The world will tell you that success is measured by fame or money, that art is a product, that kindness is a weakness. Don't believe any of it. Art should honor people, not harm them. It should lift, not break. The letter trembled in his hands. He brought it closer, almost afraid to breathe. You have a rare ability, Keanu. Not just talent, heart. You treat people with sincerity. You show respect even when the world doesn't reward it. That is a gift. Protect it. Keanu's chest tightened. He set the letter on his lap and pressed his palms to his eyes, but the tears only fell faster. He returned to the letter. If someday you remember a man named Martin Malone, remember me not for what I lost, but for what I believed in. I believed in stories. I believed in hope. And I believed in you. By the time he reached the final line, he was shaking. Carry kindness into the world. It will outlast everything else. Keanu folded the letter gently, holding it against his chest. He closed his eyes, letting the weight of the words sink into him. Not guilt, not shame. Something deeper. Something like a calling. Martin didn't write a letter of blame. He wrote a blessing. Keanu sat motionless for several minutes, the letter still pressed against his chest. The room around him blurred into soft shapes. His breathing slowed, deepened, and finally steadied, but inside, everything was shifting. The guilt that had weighed on him for days loosened its grip. In its place rose something quieter, fuller, almost sacred. Martin hadn't written to accuse him or to warn him. He had written to encourage him, to guide him, to remind him of the values he had tried through all the chaos of fame to hold on to. He placed the letter back on the table gently, as if it were something alive. A small breeze drifted through the half-open window, rustling the pages of an old script nearby. Keanu stared at the letter, letting the silence surround him. The words replayed in his mind over and over, the final line echoing with particular force. Carry kindness into the world. That was what Martin had wanted. That was what he had believed Keanu was capable of. Not box office numbers, not magazine covers, not industry awards. Kindness. Keanu wiped his face with the back of his hand and leaned back into the couch. He knew there was no going back to the version of himself who had walked into Harbor House Grill days ago. Something had changed the moment Derek's anger struck him. Something changed again when Emily shared her truth. And now, with Martin's voice speaking across decades, the final transformation had settled into place. Keanu whispered quietly into the empty room, I won't let your story disappear. He paced the living room once, then stopped in front of the window, looking out at the hills turning amber in the fading light. The world often demanded speed and spectacle, but this moment demanded slowness, reflection, and intention. A tribute, not a simple gesture, not a donation. Something that captured Martin's belief in stories, in hope, in nurturing talent that the world overlooked. He didn't know the details yet, but he knew the purpose. Keanu turned back toward the table, toward the letter that had rewritten the meaning of the past. I'll honor you, he said softly, and I'll honor what you believed stories could be. The decision rooted itself inside him, steady and unshakable. This was no longer about repairing the damage. It was about building something beautiful from the pieces. The following morning, Keanu woke before sunrise. Sleep had been light, interrupted by flashes of Martin's letter drifting through his thoughts. But instead of heaviness, there was clarity. The kind that came only after facing a painful truth and choosing to move toward something better. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of black coffee. The letter beside him, its edges worn but sacred now. The decision forming in his mind felt natural, almost inevitable. Stories were meant to lift people. Martin believed that. Keanu believed that too. He took out a notebook and began writing ideas. Not movie concepts, not scripts, but something bigger. Something Martin would have wanted to exist in the world. An incubator. A home for creators who had passion but no access. A place where stories like Martin's could find life instead of falling apart because of money or politics or power. A space where kindness shaped the culture, not fear of failure. He wrote the name slowly at the top of the page, the Martin Malone Independent Film Incubator. Keanu stared at the words, letting them settle. It felt right. He flipped to a new page and wrote again, a short film based on Martin's letter, not a dramatization, not an industry statement, something intimate, honest, something that captured the heart of a man who believed stories should honor people, not harm them. Something that allowed the world to hear his voice, the voice that had carried hope even when hope was slipping away. He pictured Emily reading the letter with him. He pictured her father's handwriting on screen. He pictured the impact it might have on someone who needed encouragement, someone who felt on the verge of giving up. Keanu closed the notebook gently. This wasn't just a tribute, it was a restoration. He reached for his phone and called Maya. She answered with the familiar tone of someone already bracing for his idea. "You're up early," she said. "I have a plan," Keanu replied, "and I need your help." There was a soft sigh on the line. "How big of a plan are we talking big enough to matter?" he said. "I want to start a film incubator, one dedicated to new voices, the kind of people Martin championed, and I want it to carry his name." The silence was long but not disapproving. "Keanu, that's beautiful," Maya finally said, "but expensive and political and time-consuming, and the press will spin it into something you didn't intend. That doesn't matter." "It does if they turn it into a feud between you and Derek." He leaned back, the morning light easing across the kitchen counter. "This has nothing to do with Derek. It has everything to do with Martin." She hesitated. "And the short film, yes," he said softly. "I want to adapt the letter. Nothing flashy. Just truth." Maya's voice warmed. "I knew you'd want to do something meaningful. You always do." "I want Emily involved," Keanu added. "She understands her father better than anyone. She should have a say." "That I can help with," Maya said. "But what about Derek? He'll see this. He'll think it's an attack." Keanu's voice steadied. "Then I need to talk to him. Face to face, respectfully." Maya exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried both admiration and worry. "You know he won't make it easy," she said. "Derek's built an entire persona around control, around never being the one who bends." "I'm not asking him to bend," Keanu replied. "I'm asking for understanding, or at least a chance to explain. And if he rejects it, then I'll keep moving forward anyway." Maya paused again, weighing her words carefully. "I'll stand behind you," she finally said. "Just tell me how you want this organized." Keanu felt a small wave of gratitude wash over him. Maya had been at his side for decades through grief and triumph, storms and calm seas, and she had never once walked away from a challenge he believed in. "The incubator comes first," he said. "We'll start small. A handful of creators, people whose stories reflect what Martin cared about. And the funding she asked. I'll handle it personally," he said. "I don't want investors involved. I don't want anyone twisting the purpose into something commercial. That's going to be a significant commitment. I know, and I'm ready for it." She didn't argue. That told him everything. After their call ended, Keanu sat for a moment with the phone still in his hand, letting the silence settle again. This wasn't about guilt. It wasn't about repairing his image or proving something to the world. It was about fulfilling a promise he'd made without words long before he ever knew he'd made it. He picked up Martin's letter from the table, reading the final lines once more. Then he folded it carefully and placed it back in the wooden box. The decision felt anchored, now unshakable. Later that afternoon, Keanu drove across the city to meet Emily. They sat together at a small cafe near her workplace. When he explained the incubator, her reaction was immediate. Her hand went to her mouth, her shoulders tensed, and her eyes filled with quiet disbelief. You want to name it after my father? She asked. Yes, Keanu said gently. I want people to remember him the way he lived, not the way he struggled. And I want his legacy to open doors for people who were never given a chance. Emily blinked several times, fighting the emotion rising in her throat. He would have never imagined something like this. That's why it matters, Keanu said. He believed in stories that healed people. So we're going to create a space for that. She nodded slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her cup. I want to help, however I can. I hoped you'd say that, Keanu replied. This has to be a partnership. As they talked through the initial ideas, how applicants might be selected, what values the program should represent, how the letter might become the foundation for a short film, there was a feeling of something unfolding naturally, as though Martin himself were guiding each step. But even as they planned, a shadow lingered at the edge of Keanu's thoughts. Derek. Sooner or later, he would have to face him, and the time for that was approaching. 2 days later, Keanu found himself standing in front of a towering glass building in downtown Los Angeles. Derek Malone's tech empire occupied the top floors, a place built on sharp angles, sharper decisions, and a reputation that left little room for softness. Keanu took a slow breath as he stepped through the polished revolving doors. He wasn't nervous, but he understood the weight of what he was about to do. This meeting wasn't about reconciliation. It was about truth. The receptionist recognized him immediately, but he quietly asked her to keep things private. Derek's assistant led him through a long hallway lined with abstract art that felt deliberately cold. The kind of art chosen to impress investors, not inspire reflection. When they reached the office, the assistant opened the door but didn't announce him. Derek was already standing behind his desk, arms crossed, jaw tight, as though he had been waiting for a fight. So Derek said, not bothering with a greeting, "You finally decided to show up." Keanu stepped inside, letting the door close behind him. "Thank you for meeting me," Derek scoffed. "Don't pretend this is some noble gesture. Let me guess, you're here to manage the fallout. You want to clean up your image after what happened at the restaurant. My friends still talk about that." "This isn't about my image," Keanu said calmly. "Of course it is," Derek snapped. "Everything you do is calculated. Every smile, every quiet, humble act, it's all part of the brand. And now you're dragging my father's name into it." Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't tense. He simply looked at Derek with the same sincerity he carried everywhere he went. "I'm not dragging anything. I'm trying to understand what happened to him." Derek's eyes narrowed. "Why now? After all these years, you never cared before. You walked away from his project and then walked into a career that made you millions." Keanu shook his head. "I didn't walk away. The studio pulled me out without giving me a choice. I didn't know the impact it had on him. Not until recently." "You expect me to believe that," Derek said bitterly. "You expect me to just accept that you're innocent?" "No," Keanu replied softly. "I'm not here to ask you to believe anything." Derek stared at him, thrown off for a moment by the lack of defensiveness. The silence stretched, charged with years of resentment and misunderstanding. Keanu reached into his pocket, slowly, not dramatically, and pulled out a single folded page. "I brought something," he said. Derek's expression hardened. "If this is some apology speech, save it." "It's not a speech," Keanu said. "It's your father's words." That stopped Derek. Keanu stepped forward and placed the folded letter on the edge of the desk. Derek didn't reach for it. He simply stared at it, confused, guarded, reluctant to engage with anything that might crack the armor he'd forged since childhood. "What is that?" Derek asked, voice quieter. "A letter your father wrote?" Keanu answered. He didn't send it, but he wanted to. "Your mother gave it to me." Derek's jaw tightened. "My mother shouldn't be giving strangers family things." Keanu didn't move. "I'm not a stranger to your father's story, and he isn't a stranger to mine." The room grew still. After a long moment, Derek reached out with slow, stiff fingers and picked up the letter. Derek held the letter as though it were a foreign object, something fragile yet unwelcome. His eyes darted up once, meeting Keanu's calm, steady gaze, then returned to the faded handwriting. Slowly, he unfolded the page. The room seemed to shrink as he began to read. For several moments there was no movement, no breath, no sound except the faint hum of the city below. Derek's shoulders tensed at the first lines, then loosened slightly as he continued. His lips tightened, his brow furrowed, his hand trembled once before he steadied it. Keanu stayed silent. He didn't pace. He didn't explain. He let the words speak. When Derek reached the sentence about never blaming Keanu, his jaw clenched. He inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring, as though something inside him had cracked. When he reached the lines about kindness outlasting everything else, he swallowed hard and blinked rapidly, refusing to let the emotion show. By the time he finished reading, his hand had lowered the letter to the desk, but he didn't let go of it. He stared at the floor, breathing unevenly. "He wrote this," Derek finally said, voice rough. "He actually wrote this." "Yes," Keanu replied softly. Derek shook his head, anger and sorrow battling behind his eyes. "He never showed us anything like this. Not to me, not to my mother." He barely spoke after the business collapsed. He shut down. His voice cracked slightly. "I thought he blamed the world. I thought he blamed you. I thought—" He couldn't finish. Keanu waited. Derek exhaled shakily. "I spent years telling myself it was your fault." It was easier than accepting the truth. "And what is the truth?" Keanu asked gently. Derek's eyes lifted slowly to meet his. There was no fire now, only exhaustion. He lost faith in himself, and I didn't know how to help him. I was young, angry, scared. It was easier to project that onto you, onto the industry, onto anyone except him. Keanu nodded. Pain looks for a place to land. Sometimes it chooses the wrong target. Derek looked away sharply, ashamed by the accuracy of the words. After a long silence, he whispered, "I can't forgive what happened. I can't pretend the years didn't change us." "I'm not asking you to forgive anything," Keanu said. "I'm here because your father believed in stories that lift people. I'm honoring that. I'm building something in his name, an incubator for creators who deserve a chance. Emily is involved. Your mother supports it. I would like you to understand it even if you don't support me." Derek's breath caught again, not from anger this time, but from the disorientation of hearing a man he had hated for decades ask for nothing. "No press," Keanu added quietly. "No cameras, no articles. This isn't a headline. It's a legacy." Derek stared at him, searching for the hidden agenda he'd always assumed existed. He found none. Emily stood outside her brother's office building, clutching her bag tightly as she waited for security to escort her up. She had not planned on confronting Derek this soon, but when Keanu called to say he had delivered their father's letter, something in her heart told her she needed to be there. Not to defend Keanu, not to attack Derek, but to finally speak the truth the family had kept buried for too long. When the elevator opened on the top floor, Derek's assistant greeted her with a sympathetic nod, as though sensing the tension around her visit. Emily walked down the corridor with steady steps, pausing only when she reached the office door. She knocked softly. "Come in," Derek's voice said, tight and worn. She opened the door. Derek sat behind his desk, but he looked nothing like the domineering executive she had always known. His posture slumped slightly. His eyes were red around the edges. Their father's letter lay unfolded on the desk beside him. "Em," he said, startled. "Why are you here? I needed to see you," she replied, stepping inside and closing the door quietly. "And I needed you to hear me." He tried to straighten up, pulling himself back into the armor he wore every day. "If this is about Keanu." "It is," she said. "And it isn't." He fell silent. Emily walked to the chair across from him and sat down, hands folded in her lap. "I know you met with him." Derek looked away. "Doesn't matter." "It does," she said gently. "Because I know what you're feeling, and I know you won't say it out loud unless someone forces you to." She waited. He didn't respond. Emily leaned forward slightly. "Dad never blamed Keanu." Derek's jaw tightened instantly. "You don't know that." "I do." Her voice softened, but her words stayed firm. "Mom knows. I know. And now you know because you read his letter." Derek's breath faltered. He pushed away from his desk and stood pacing toward the window, as though the view might offer an escape. "That letter doesn't change anything. It's too late." "No, Derek," she said. "It changes everything." He shook his head. "You always try to see the bright side, Em. But that's not how the world works." Dad was crushed. The studio killed his dream, and I watched him fade away while that actor you all love became a star. "That actor has a name," she replied softly. "And he didn't take anything from Dad." Derek's shoulders stiffened. His voice cracked as he said, "I needed someone to blame, someone to hate, and Keanu was the easiest choice." Emily rose slowly from her chair. "I know," she said. "But Dad didn't want that for you. He didn't want bitterness to become your life's purpose." He turned sharply, eyes flashing. "And what was I supposed to do? Just watch him collapse and pretend nothing happened? Pretend it didn't destroy our family?" "No," she said. "You were supposed to grieve, not attack someone who wasn't responsible." Derek looked at her as though she had struck something deep inside him. His breathing grew uneven. His voice shook. "I dumped water on him. Em," he whispered, "I humiliated a man who didn't deserve it, not because of what he did, but because of what I felt." Emily stepped closer, her expression filled with compassion, not judgment. "Then it's time to face that." Derek sank into the chair behind him, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. The posture was unfamiliar on him. He had spent decades building an image of strength, control, and certainty. Now, beneath the weight of truth, all of it seemed to collapse. Emily watched him quietly, giving him space to breathe, to unravel, to finally acknowledge the pain he had refused to name. "I kept telling myself Keanu caused everything," Derek said through his hands. "It was easier than admitting I failed Dad, that I didn't know how to help him when he needed us most." "You were a kid," Emily reminded him gently. "You didn't know how to carry his grief. None of us did." He shook his head. "But I turned that confusion into anger. And the older I got, the more I fed it. I built a whole story in my mind. One where Keanu walked away without looking back. One where he didn't care about Dad at all. One where hurting him would somehow even the scales." Emily's voice softened further. "But none of that was true." "I know," he whispered. He lowered his hand slowly. His eyes were strained, holding years of regret he had never let himself feel. Emily took a small step closer. "When you poured that water on him," she asked, "what did you feel in that moment?" Derek let out a shaky breath. "For 1 second, I felt powerful, like I was finally defending Dad. Like I was finally doing something instead of carrying around guilt like a stone in my chest." His voice dropped. "But the second it happened, I felt ashamed, deeply ashamed. Because he didn't fight back. He didn't even get angry. He never would have," Emily said. "That's not who he is." Derek nodded slowly. "I know that now. I saw it today. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't acting for sympathy. He genuinely wanted to understand what happened to Dad." His voice cracked. "And all I did was aim my anger at the wrong person for 20 years. Emily placed a hand on the back of the chair, steadying herself. "Derek, this doesn't erase what happened to Dad. It doesn't erase how hard it was for all of us. But you can't spend the rest of your life punishing yourself or someone else for something none of us controlled." He looked up at her, something wounded and desperate in his eyes. "Then what am I supposed to do now?" "Start by telling the truth," she said. "To yourself, to Keanu, to Mom, maybe, but most of all to Dad's memory. You projected guilt onto someone who didn't deserve it. Now you can choose to stop." Derek swallowed hard. The words sank deep, and after that he asked quietly, "After that, Emily said you decide whether you want to honor Dad's legacy or run from it." He closed his eyes, breathing slowly, letting the heaviness move through him. When he opened them again, something had shifted. He wasn't healed, not yet, but he was finally honest. The small theater sat tucked between two older buildings on a quiet Los Angeles street, its marquee softly glowing with simple white letters, a tribute to Martin Malone. There was no red carpet, no flashing lights, no reporters waiting outside, just the quiet hum of people gathering for something intimate and sacred. Keanu had insisted on that. The story wasn't meant for spectacle. It was meant for healing. Inside, warm lights illuminated rows of softly cushioned seats. The space felt more like a community center than a premiere venue. That was intentional too. Martin had always believed stories belonged to everyone, not only the people at the top. Keanu stood near the entrance, greeting the small group of attendees with gentle smiles and quiet gratitude. Most were young filmmakers from the incubator's first cohort, each of them carrying their own dreams and struggles. Tonight, though, they weren't here for themselves. They were here for a man they had never met, but whose story had already begun shaping their sense of purpose. Emily arrived first. She stepped into the dim lobby wearing a simple dark dress, her hair pulled back. Her expression soft, but tense with anticipation. When she saw Keanu, she gave him a grateful smile that wavered at the edges. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I hope so," Keanu said. "For your sake, for your families." Emily exhaled slowly. Dad would have been humbled by this, truly humbled. A few minutes later, the doors opened again, and two staff members gently guided Linda Malone inside in her wheelchair. She wore a light blue shawl around her shoulders, her silver hair brushed neatly, her face glowing with a mix of tenderness and vulnerability. Emily hurried to her side and kissed her forehead. "Mom," she whispered, "we're all here. Dad is here too, in a way." Linda looked around until her gaze landed on Keanu. Her eyes softened instantly. "You kept your promise," she said. Keanu lowered his head with quiet respect. "I tried to honor him the best I could." Linda reached out her hand, and Keanu took it gently. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was steady when she said, "Thank you for giving him the dignity he deserved." They escorted her to the front row, settling her comfortably. Emily sat on one side of her, Keanu on the other. The rest of the small audience trickled in, finding their seats. A hush gradually fell over the room, a soft anticipation woven through the theater. But one seat remained empty, the last row, far corner. Derek was nowhere to be seen. Emily glanced back several times, worry clouding her expression. But she didn't say anything. Keanu offered a reassuring nod. "He'll come if he's ready," he said quietly. The theater lights dimmed the room, falling into a gentle darkness. The screen flickered to life with the first frames of the short film, a simple but powerful montage of archival footage, handwritten notes, and glimpses of Martin's life as remembered through the people who loved him. Just as the first line of narration began, the door at the back of the theater opened with a soft click. Derek slipped inside, head lowered, shoulders tense. Instead of taking a seat near the front, he walked to the very last row and sat alone, almost hiding in the shadows. Emily noticed him and let out a slow, shaky breath. Keanu didn't turn around, but he sensed the shift in the room. Derek had come, and that was enough for now. The film unfolded with gentle pacing, allowing every image, every word, every memory to breathe. It didn't dramatize Martin's struggle. It didn't turn his pain into spectacle. Instead, it illuminated the quiet beauty of a man who loved stories and believed in people even when life had taken more from him than it ever returned. There were photos of him at his small production desk, smiling with a pen tucked behind his ear. Clips of his handwritten notes about hope, about the magic of storytelling, about lifting others through creativity. There were readings of excerpts from his journals, spoken by actors who delivered the lines with reverence and restraint. Then came the centerpiece, Martin's letter. The camera lingered on the envelope, the faded ink, the gentle crease where it had been folded for decades. The narrator began reading the letter in a soft, steady voice, allowing each sentence to settle into the hearts of those watching. "I never blamed you. You carry a kindness the world needs. Art should honor people, not harm them. Carry that goodness forward." In the front row, Linda closed her eyes as tears streamed down her cheeks, her fingers gripping Emily's hand with a mixture of grief and pride. Emily leaned her head gently against her mother's shoulder, tears slipping down her own face. The audience remained still, breathing deeply, absorbing every word. Up in the last row, Derek stared at the screen with unblinking intensity. His jaw trembled, his fingertips dug into the armrest. Hearing his father's voice, reborn through someone else's, did something to him he had never felt prepared for. It stripped away the stories he had used as armor. It stripped away the anger that had been his shield. It left him with the truth he had refused to face. His father had not died blaming Keanu. His father had died believing in kindness, believing in art, believing in the man sitting 3 rows ahead, not the bitterness growing inside his own son. When the final scene faded into a quiet dedication. For Martin. For the dreamers who deserved more than the world gave them. The room remained silent for several long seconds. No applause, just breath. Healing didn't begin with noise. It began with stillness. The lights slowly rose. Linda wiped her eyes. Emily held her mother's hand. Keanu lowered his head, letting the weight of the moment settle into him. In the back row, Derek finally stood. He didn't rush. He didn't hide. He simply walked down the aisle, step by step, toward the man he had hated for most of his life. Keanu turned as Derek approached, stopping just in front of him. For a moment, Derek couldn't speak. His throat tightened. His eyes glistened. Then, in a trembling voice, barely above a whisper, he said, "This was my father." The morning of the foundation launch arrived softly, with a pale sun rising over downtown Los Angeles. The event wasn't meant to be glamorous, but news had already begun to spread about Keanu's new fellowship for independent filmmakers. Reporters and small media outlets gathered outside the Cultural Arts Center where the announcement would take place. They expected humility from Keanu. They expected sincerity. What they didn't expect was a second name on the press list, Derek Malone. Inside the building, the main hall had been arranged with modest care. A small stage stood at the front, framed by simple banners displaying the fellowship's name, the Martin Malone Film Fellowship. Not a foundation for celebrities, not a corporate program, a fellowship for storytellers who needed guidance, resources, and someone to believe in them. Keanu stood behind the stage for several minutes before stepping out. He wore a simple black suit, nothing flashy. His expression was calm, but there was a quiet weight in his eyes. He had not slept much, not from worry, but from reflecting on all the steps that had led to this moment. The letter, Linda's tears, Emily's strength, Derek's breaking point. Tonight felt like the culmination of many wounds finally finding air to breathe. Maya approached him, adjusting the microphone on the podium. "You ready?" she asked softly. "As ready as I can be," he replied. "Derek is here," she added. "I know. You're sure about this?" "Yes," he said. "He needs to do this, and maybe the world needs to see it." Maya nodded and stepped aside as Keanu walked out to the stage. A ripple passed through the audience, a respectful hush settling over the room. Cameras clicked softly. Reporters leaned forward with pens ready. Keanu took a breath and began, "Thank you all for being here today. This isn't a celebration of me. It's a celebration of a man whose kindness and vision never got the recognition they deserved. Martin Malone believed in the power of stories. He believed in lifting others. And today I want to carry that belief forward." His voice remained steady, warm, grounded. He spoke about Martin's early career, his dreams, the values he lived by. He didn't mention the collapse of Martin's studio or the tragedy that followed. This moment wasn't about reliving the pain. It was about honoring the soul behind it. He continued, "The Martin Malone Film Fellowship will support new voices in filmmaking. People who have passion but lack resources. People with stories that deserve to be told." The room listened intently. Some nodded, some smiled. Cameras continued to flash. Then the back doors opened. Derek stepped inside. A wave of murmurs passed through the room. Reporters whipped their heads around. Assistants leaned toward each other in disbelief. Even Maya inhaled sharply, but Keanu did not flinch. Derek walked down the aisle slowly, wearing a charcoal gray suit and a somber expression. He looked like a man who had not come to reclaim power, but to surrender the weight he had carried far too long. When he reached the front of the room, Keanu stepped aside just enough for him to join him at the podium. Whispers spread like electricity. No one expected this. Derek placed both hands on the wooden podium. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at the reporters. Instead, he looked at the banner with his father's name and took a long, steady breath. "I have something to say." Derek gripped the sides of the podium as though steadying himself. The room fell completely silent. Even the photographers lowered their cameras, sensing that what was about to be said was not a performance, but something raw and unguarded. My father, Derek, began, his voice low but firm, was a man who believed in stories. He believed in people. And he believed in this industry long before it believed in him. He paused, swallowing hard. But life didn't treat him kindly. When his dream collapsed, so did he. He exhaled the breath, shaky. For years, I told myself I was angry at the world, angry at Hollywood, angry at one man in particular. But the truth is, I was angry at myself for not being able to save him, for not knowing how to help him when he needed his family most. The crowd remained still, unsure if they should look at Derek or at Keanu, who stood quietly beside him with steady patience. Derek continued, I blamed the wrong people. I blamed someone who did nothing but carry kindness into the world, someone my father admired. Someone my father never blamed. His voice cracked. I let my grief turn into anger. I let that anger become my identity. He turned slightly toward Keanu, but not fully. There was vulnerability in the partial gesture. Keanu didn't ask me to be here. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for anything, but I needed to be here. I needed to say this out loud. A few reporters exchanged astonished glances. Pens hovered midair. Derek cleared his throat and faced the audience again. Today, Keanu is launching a fellowship in my father's name, a fellowship that reflects everything my father believed storytelling should be, and I am here to support it, fully. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I will match the funding, Derek announced. Every dollar, every year, not because it's good PR, not because it benefits me, but because it honors the man my father truly was and the man I want to become. A stunned silence filled the hall. Even the cameras hesitated before flashing back to life. Derek lowered his head briefly, collecting himself. Then, with a steady voice, he said the words he had carried for decades. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry I didn't understand sooner. He stepped back from the podium, his breathing heavy, but relieved, as though a weight had been cut loose. Keanu placed a hand lightly on Derek's shoulder, not for show, not for applause, but because healing deserved quiet support, and because Martin Malone would have wanted this moment to exist. The crowd slowly dispersed after the fellowship announcement, leaving behind only soft echoes of conversation and a lingering sense of something meaningful taking shape. Reporters were still buzzing. Young filmmakers whispered excitedly about the doors that might open for them. And Maya stood off to the side, watching with quiet pride. But Keanu wasn't thinking about any of that. He was watching Derek. Derek stood alone near the back of the hall, shoulders lowered, expression dazed from everything he had just poured out in front of strangers. For the first time Keanu had ever seen, Derek looked stripped of his armor. No anger, no ego, just a man carrying a lifetime of grief and confusion he could no longer hide behind. Keanu walked toward him slowly. You did something good today, he said. Derek let out a humorless breath. I don't know if good is the word. Necessary, maybe. It took courage, Keanu replied. Derek shook his head. No, it took finally being tired of lying to myself. Keanu didn't argue. Some truths didn't need softening. Do you want to talk somewhere quieter? Keanu asked. Derek hesitated, then nodded. They stepped into a small meeting room off the main hall, a simple space with 2 chairs, a table, and a window overlooking the street. No cameras, no assistants, no audience. The door clicked softly behind them, leaving only the quiet pressure of 2 lives intersecting at a fragile moment. Derek sat heavily in one chair. Keanu sat across from him, giving him space while still offering presence. For a long time, Derek didn't speak. He stared at the floor, rubbing his hands together, wrestling with emotions that had lived unnamed for decades. Finally, he whispered, I don't know how you can look at me without anger. Keanu folded his hands calmly. Because anger isn't what your father passed on. Derek swallowed hard. I humiliated you. I made you the villain of a story that wasn't yours. I threw water on you in front of a room full of people. And you didn't fight back. You didn't even look offended. You just walked away. His voice cracked. You were kinder to me in that moment than I've ever been to you. Keanu let the words sink into the air before replying. I wasn't thinking about kindness. I was thinking about pain. Yours and your father's. You didn't deserve any of it, Derek said, voice trembling. But I needed someone to blame, someone I could reach, someone who wasn't already gone. I understand, Keanu said gently. Derek finally looked up, eyes raw. I'm ashamed, deeply ashamed, not because of the premiere, not because of the press, but because I spent so many years hating a man my father admired. Keanu leaned forward slightly. Your father saw goodness in people. He saw it in me, and he saw it in you too. Derek shook his head. I didn't honor him. I punished the wrong person and ignored the one who needed me most. You were young, Keanu said. You were hurting. Grief does strange things to people. It twists truth when we're not ready to face it. Derek covered his face with his hands. Do you think Dad would forgive me? Forgive me? Keanu didn't rush his answer. He waited until Derek lowered his hands and met his eyes again. Then he said softly, I think he already did. Derek froze at Keanu's words. The room felt impossibly quiet, as though even the air waited for him to breathe again. He blinked once, the muscles in his jaw tightening as emotion rose too fast for him to control. You think he forgave me? He repeated softly, the disbelief clear in his voice. I don't just think it, Keanu said. I see it in what he wrote. I hear it in the way he talked about you. And I felt it when I read how he viewed the world. He didn't hold space for bitterness. Not toward you, not toward me, not toward anyone. Derek swallowed hard, but I wasn't there for him the way I should have been. I was angry all the time, and he shut me out more and more. I thought maybe he stopped caring. He never stopped caring. Keanu replied gently. He was hurting. People who hurt often silence themselves because they don't want their pain to spill onto the people they love. That wasn't your failure. It was his way of trying to protect you. Derek leaned back in the chair, eyes distant, as though he were seeing his father for the first time in years. I always thought he gave up. Now I realize he was just exhausted. And I punished him for that without meaning to. Keanu nodded. You were a son trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. You did the best you could with the grief you understood at the time. Derek rubbed his hands together again, grounding himself. I don't know how to let go of the guilt. It's been there so long it feels like part of me. Then, don't let it go all at once, Keanu said. Let it soften. Let it transform. Use it to honor him, not to punish yourself. Derek's voice dropped to a whisper. Honor him? How you already started, Keanu said with a small smile. Standing with me today, matching the funding, speaking the truth you spent years avoiding. That wasn't weakness, Derek. That was the deepest kind of strength. Derek looked down his shoulders, trembling slightly. I never thought I'd hear you say anything like that. I'm not your enemy, Keanu replied. I never was. Derek's breath caught. He looked up with eyes still wet but steadier now. Thank you for not turning your back on me, for not making me relive every mistake. This isn't about mistakes, Keanu said. It's about rebuilding something meaningful from them. For the first time, Derek nodded with genuine understanding. Keanu rose from his chair and extended his hand. Derek hesitated, then stood as well, taking it with a grip that held both apology and acceptance. A long, fragile silence followed one that didn't hurt anymore. Do you think this is the beginning of something better? Derek asked. Keanu's smile was gentle and true. I think it already is. 6 months passed, and the world around the Martin Malone Film Fellowship began to shift in quiet, meaningful ways. What started as a tribute had evolved into a living, breathing space, filled with voices that might never have been heard. The fellowship office buzzed every day with students pitching ideas, huddled over laptops, rehearsing scenes on worn couches, or debating the meaning of a story long after the sun had gone down. Keanu visited often not as a celebrity, but as a guiding presence. He walked the halls with a gentle smile, reading scripts, listening to pitches, offering encouragement with the same softness Martin once gave him. Students responded to that warmth. They brought him projects full of honesty and vulnerability, stories rooted in real lives, real struggles, and real hope. Emily fit naturally into her new role as a program advisor. She had inherited her father's gift for seeing the heart within a story. Students gravitated toward her, trusting her calm guidance and her ability to ask questions that pushed their work deeper. She helped shape narratives, refine character arcs, and remind each filmmaker why they started telling stories in the first place. But most importantly, she carried her father's spirit into every room she entered. One afternoon, Keanu found her in the screening area, surrounded by a group of students who eagerly shared a rough cut of their short film. Emily laughed with them, celebrated their progress, and offered thoughtful ideas. When she looked up and noticed Keanu watching from the doorway, she smiled warmly. "You'd be proud," she said. "I'm already proud," Keanu replied. The joy in the room was a reminder that something beautiful had grown from years of pain and misunderstanding. Yet, amid the flourishing creativity, the fellowship experienced a quieter, more intimate transformation as well. Linda passed peacefully 2 months after the premiere. She had watched the tribute film several times in those final weeks, asking Emily to replay the letter scene over and over. Each viewing brought tears, but also comfort. She left the world knowing her husband's memory had been restored with dignity and love. Her final words to Emily had been simple: "Keep his light alive." And Emily had taken that promise to heart. The day of Linda's memorial, Derek stood beside Emily at the service, not as the armored man he used to be, but as a son learning to breathe again without the weight of unspoken guilt. He greeted guests with quiet humility and listened as people shared stories about his mother and father. When he saw Keanu arrive, he stepped forward, offering a firm handshake and a grateful nod. "Thank you for everything Derek had said. I'm honored to be here," Keanu replied. Now, months later, Derek continued to show up not just for Emily, but for himself. He began volunteering at the fellowship once a week. His role wasn't formal, but it was valuable. He led small workshops about responsibility and resilience, speaking from a place of raw honesty instead of authority. Students related to him more than he expected. They admired his transparency, his willingness to admit mistakes, and his openness about rebuilding his life. After years spent carrying emotional weight he didn't understand. In those rooms, Derek found something healing. He found purpose. Over time, Derek's presence became a familiar rhythm inside the fellowship. Students who once flinched at his stern posture later found themselves listening intently as he explained how pressure, fear, and pride can quietly trap a person. He never preached. He simply shared what he wished someone had told him decades earlier. The students respected that honesty. Some even pulled him aside afterward, admitting his words helped them understand their own families in ways they never had before. Keanu often watched from a distance as Derek worked with the younger filmmakers. What he saw wasn't the bitter man who had stood over him in a crowded restaurant dripping ice water down his jeans. What he saw was someone who had finally stopped running from himself. Someone who was beginning to build rather than destroy. It was a transformation Keanu respected deeply, not because it made things easier, but because it required courage Derek never knew he had. One Friday afternoon, as sunlight warmed the fellowship courtyard, Keanu walked outside to find Derek sitting alone on a wooden bench. He was reviewing a student's screenplay pen tapping absently against the page. When he looked up, there was none of the old defensiveness in his face, only a calm steadiness shaped by months of change. "You're becoming part of the heartbeat here," Keanu said as he sat beside him. Derek let out a soft laugh. "I don't know about that." "I do," Keanu replied. "They trust you." Derek looked down at the screenplay in his hands. "For a long time, I didn't trust myself. I blamed the world for my pain. I blamed you. I blamed anyone who stood close enough to carry it." And now, Keanu asked, "Now I'm tired of carrying things that don't belong to me." Derek paused. "These kids, they remind me of what my dad loved. The soundstage, the lights, the way a story could change someone's entire day. I thought all of that died with him. It didn't," Keanu said gently. "You're helping keep it alive." The moment hung between them, quiet but full, illuminated by the late afternoon sun. Inside the building, Emily stepped into the doorway and smiled at the sight of them. For the first time, she saw her brother not as the wounded man she had spent years trying to understand, but as someone healing someone becoming whole again. Linda would have been grateful to see it. Emily felt that truth settle softly in her chest. A group of students burst out of the building, laughing, rushing past the benches with cameras and props in hand. Derek watched them run, his expression almost wistful. "They remind me of us," he said. Keanu nodded. "That's the point." And in that simple exchange, both men understood something they hadn't been able to articulate before. The fellowship hadn't just revived Martin Malone's legacy. It had created space for new beginnings, for redemption, and for a future that honored the past without being trapped by it. The late afternoon light stretched long across the quiet hills as Keanu walked the narrow dirt path leading toward the abandoned filming site. Grass had grown tall around the old wooden platform. The wind brushed through it softly, like someone turning the pages of a memory. This was where Martin Malone had once stood with a camera on his shoulder, full of belief, full of hope, full of the quiet certainty that stories mattered. For a long moment, Keanu simply stood there, letting the silence settle around him. He held a single white flower in his hand. It felt weightless, but what it represented carried the weight of months of pain. Truth, reconciliation, and transformation. He knelt and placed the flower at the edge of the platform where Martin once directed a young group of actors trying to prove themselves. The moment felt simple, but inside Keanu it was profound. It was the closing of a circle that had opened decades earlier without his knowledge. The wood creaked lightly under his touch as he ran his fingers along the surface. Part of him wished he could go back in time, back to that early version of himself who had been swept into fame with no understanding of how many people were lifted or left behind by the shifting currents of success. But time only moved forward, and the only thing a person could do with the past was honor it, learn from it, and choose a different way when life offered the chance. He stood slowly, breathing in the cool evening air. Humiliation, pain, and misunderstanding had brought him here. A glass of ice water, a crowded restaurant, a man consumed by decades of resentment. That moment could have hardened everyone involved. It could have become another wound in a world already covered in them. But something else had happened instead. Because kindness, even when quiet, had refused to back away. Because truth, even when uncomfortable, had been faced. And because healing, when chosen with courage, had reached further than any of them expected. Keanu looked across the empty clearing, remembering Derek's voice on the day of the foundation launch, remembering the tremble in it, remembering how the anger cracked, revealing a man who had carried guilt like a stone in his chest for far too long. Derek wasn't healed fully. No one expected him to be. But he had begun the journey. And that was enough. That was everything. Emily had blossomed in her new role, guiding young filmmakers with the same compassion she brought to her school counseling work. She had found a way to honor her father's memory, not through sorrow, but through purpose. And Linda, before her passing, had seen the world begin to remember Martin the way he deserved to be remembered. Not as a man who failed, but as a man whose vision sparked something lasting. Keanu closed his eyes and let the evening breeze wash over him. He thought about how humiliation had become healing, how conflict had become connection, how a moment meant to shame him had instead opened a door none of them knew they needed. Something shifted inside him then, something gentle, something steady. Kindness had changed this story. Not force, not pride, kindness. And he hoped everyone listening to this journey would carry that truth into their own lives. As the sun dipped lower, Keanu walked a slow circle around the site, letting the memories he never witnessed settle into place. He imagined Martin adjusting the camera, calling out cues, encouraging nervous actors who were hungry for their first break. He imagined the laughter, the long nights, the way worn-out equipment still carried magic when placed in the hands of someone who believed in the power of stories. Even though Keanu had never filmed here, he felt connected to the ground beneath his feet, to the man whose dream never had the chance to reach its full light. He paused again at the white flower. It stood out against the weathered boards, a small symbol of peace, in a world that often rushed past it. For a moment, Keanu wondered what Martin would have said if he could see all of this now. The fellowship bearing his name, his children finding healing, strangers discovering his legacy, a once broken family learning to breathe again. Perhaps he would have smiled, quiet and grateful, proud that the stories he wanted to tell were still helping others find their own voices. The world moved quickly. Films were forgotten, names faded, but the impact of kindness never vanished. It echoed. It echoed through people the way music echoed through an empty room, touching corners no one expected. Keanu felt that truth settle deeper the longer he stood there. He hadn't come today to mourn, he had come to honor. And in honoring Martin's life, he had discovered something about his own. He looked up at the sky, now streaked with gold and soft violet. Life was fragile. Reputations were fragile. Even relationships could break under the pressure of misunderstanding and fear. But courage could mend what fear tried to destroy. Courage could turn old pain into new beginnings. As he began walking back toward the path, Keanu whispered a quiet promise. "Your story won't be forgotten, Martin. Not while I'm here. Not while the people you loved carry it forward." It felt right to say it aloud, not for the world, but for the man whose letter had reshaped everything. A letter filled with grace. A letter that asked for no apology, only honesty. A letter that had given Keanu the strength to step into a role he never expected, the keeper of another man's unfinished legacy. At the base of the hill, Keanu turned one final time to look back. The flower glowed in the last streak of sunlight. It looked small, but it was enough. Sometimes small things carried the greatest meaning. Sometimes a single moment of humility opened a door to redemption. And as Keanu started toward the road, he felt lighter. Not because the past had been erased, but because it had been understood, faced, healed. For everyone watching this story unfold, he hoped they felt that same possibility. Because healing didn't begin with anger, it began with courage.